Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my mom and I had just gotten back to Dallas from visiting my grandparents in Michigan. We had flown into DFW Airport late at night, late enough that it felt like we might have been on the last flight coming in. I do not remember the exact time, but I remember the feeling of being exhausted in the way only a child can be after a trip. My clothes probably smelled like airplane seats and stale airport air. I was carrying something small, maybe a toy or a backpack, and all I wanted was to get home. At that age, airports felt huge to me. Everything was too bright, too loud, and too spread out. Even when it was late, there were always signs glowing overhead, rolling suitcases clicking across tile floors, announcements echoing from speakers, and people moving quickly like they knew exactly where they were going. I usually stayed close to my mom because I was scared of getting lost. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport seemed especially massive after a long flight. It felt like we had to walk forever just to get from the gate to the place where we could finally leave. We had parked in long-term parking before the trip, which meant we needed to take one of those electric train or shuttle systems across the field to get back to the car. I do not know what they officially called it, but in my memory it was like a little airport train. It moved on a track and carried people from one part of the airport to another. It was not like a normal train with lots of people and stops. It felt more like a quiet shuttle that drifted through the dark between the airport and the parking area. By the time we got on it, almost everyone else seemed to be gone. There may have been people in another car farther down the train. I cannot say for sure because I was little and I did not look around enough to know. But in the car where my mom and I sat, we were alone. I remember that clearly. It was just the two of us sitting in those hard seats with our bags nearby. The doors shut, the shuttle started moving, and the airport lights slowly began to fall behind us. Outside the windows was mostly darkness. There were airport lights in the distance, of course. Runway lights, parking lot lights, glowing signs, and the far-off brightness from the terminals. But between those things was a large open field. In the daytime, it probably would not have seemed scary at all. It was probably just grass, pavement, tracks, service roads, and airport space. But at night, especially from inside a moving shuttle, it looked empty and endless. The train moved smoothly at first. I remember looking out the window and seeing the dark field pass by. The lights from the airport reflected faintly on the glass. Sometimes we went past poles with lights at the top, and for a second the inside of the shuttle would brighten. Then we would move beyond them, and the darkness would come back. My mom was sitting next to me. She was tired too. We had been traveling all day. We had probably spent time saying goodbye to my grandparents, getting to the airport, waiting at the gate, flying back, getting off the plane, walking through the terminal, and dragging our luggage around. It had been a long day, and I think we were both quiet because of it. Then my mom said something that I have never forgotten. She looked around the mostly empty shuttle, looked out at the dark field, and said, "Wouldn't it be weird if this train stopped and the lights turned off?" At the time, I did not fully understand why that was such a creepy thing to say. I was a kid, so I probably just looked at her and thought about it for a second. Maybe I laughed a little. Maybe I said, yeah, or maybe I did not say anything at all. I do not remember my exact response, but I remember the moment after she said it better than I remember almost anything else from that trip. About half a second later, the train stopped. Not slowly, not like it was pulling into a station. It just stopped. The smooth motion ended so suddenly that I felt it in my body. The little hum of the train disappeared. Everything became still. Then the lights went out. Every light inside the shuttle went dark. The only thing left was the faint glow of distant airport lights coming in through the windows, but it was barely enough to see anything. 1 second, we were sitting in a normal, brightly lit airport shuttle. The next second, we were locked inside a dark train car in the middle of a huge, empty field. I remember feeling my stomach drop. For a child, it felt like the entire world had changed in 1 second. The dark outside did not look the same anymore. Before, it had just been a field. Now it looked like we were stranded somewhere far away from everything. I could see the airport lights in the distance, but they seemed too far to help. The terminals looked small and unreachable. The parking lot lights looked like tiny dots. There were no people nearby, no cars passing close to us, no other passengers in our car, no one walking outside, just darkness. My mom reacted quickly. I do not remember her panicking, but I remember that she seemed tense. She tried the doors. They were locked. That made it worse. If the train had stopped but the doors opened, maybe we could have at least stepped out, even though being out in the dark field would have been scary too. But the doors would not open. We were stuck inside. I remember looking at the doors and noticing how solid they seemed. They were not normal car doors. They were the kind of sliding doors that looked like they belonged to the shuttle system itself. There was no handle for us to pull, no obvious way to get out. They were closed tightly, and nothing happened when my mom tried to open them. At that age, I did not know how airport transportation systems worked. I did not know whether there was a speaker, an emergency button, a camera, or a way for someone to know we were stuck. All I knew was that the lights were out, the train had stopped, and the doors were locked. The strangest part was that it happened right after my mom said it. Not a few minutes later. Not later in the ride. Not after we had joked about it for a while. Immediately, she said, "Wouldn't it be weird if this train stopped and the lights turned off?" Then it stopped. Then the lights turned off. I remember looking at her in the darkness. I think she looked back at me, and for a second, neither of us knew what to say. It was one of those moments where something is so perfectly timed that your brain refuses to accept it. Even if there was a normal reason for the train to malfunction, even if the lights went out because of some technical issue, it was still impossible to ignore the timing. It felt like the train had heard her. That is obviously not what happened. I know that now. It was probably an electrical problem, a mechanical issue, or something normal that happens sometimes with airport transportation. But when you are 6 or 7 years old and trapped in darkness after your mom says the exact thing that happens, it does not feel normal. It feels like something answered. I remember sitting very still. The shuttle was quiet in a way that made every small sound feel louder. I could hear the faint creak of the car. I could hear my mom moving next to me. I could hear the distant noise of the airport, but it was muffled and far away. Somewhere in the distance, maybe planes were still moving, maybe airport vehicles were driving, maybe announcements were still being made inside the terminals. But where we were, in the middle of that field, it felt like we had been separated from all of it. I remember asking my mom what happened. I do not remember exactly what she said. She may have told me that it was okay. She may have said someone would come. She may have tried to make it sound like a normal delay. She was probably trying not to scare me. because parents do that when something unexpected happens. They can be worried themselves but still speak in a calm voice so their child does not panic. But I could tell that she thought it was strange too. The way she had said it right before it happened was too close. It was too exact. We waited. At first, it probably did not seem like a long time. A few minutes can pass quickly when you expect someone to fix a problem. Maybe we thought the lights would come back on right away. Maybe we expected the train to start moving again in a few seconds. But it did not. The train stayed still. The lights stayed off. The doors stayed locked. I remember checking the windows over and over. I was trying to see if anyone was coming. Every time a faraway light moved or reflected on the glass, I thought maybe it was a vehicle. But mostly, there was nothing. The field outside seemed enormous. I could see the track stretching ahead into darkness, but I could not see where it went. The grass or open space beside it looked black. The airport in the distance had that strange nighttime glow, but it did not make me feel safer. In some ways, it made things worse, because I could see that we were near something busy and normal, but still completely alone. I remember wondering whether anyone knew we were there. That was probably the scariest thought. It was not just that the train stopped. It was that we were in a place where nobody could see us. We were not on a road. We were not in a parking lot. We were not standing at a gate with airport employees nearby. We were in a dark shuttle car in the middle of a field, and I had no idea whether anyone had noticed that it had stopped. My mom kept trying to figure out what to do. I think there may have been some kind of intercom or emergency contact system inside the shuttle, but I cannot remember clearly. I was too focused on the darkness and the locked doors. I remember her looking around, maybe pressing buttons, maybe calling for help in some way. I remember waiting for a voice to come through a speaker. I remember expecting something to happen and then nothing happening for a while. The longer we sat there, the stranger it felt. At some point, I began to imagine things outside. I was only 6 or 7, and I had a child's imagination. The dark field looked like the kind of place where anything could be hiding. I imagined someone walking toward the train. I imagined shadows moving in the grass. I imagined that something could be standing outside the window where we could not see it clearly. I do not remember actually seeing anyone out there. That is important. I do not want to make the story bigger than it was. I did not see a ghost or a figure in the field. I did not hear voices. I did not see something moving around the train. The fear came from being stuck, from the darkness, and from the timing of what my mom had said. But that was enough. Every once in a while, a distant light would move. Maybe it was a plane taxiing. Maybe it was a service vehicle. Maybe it was just another shuttle farther away. But from inside our dark car, every little light looked important. I remember staring hard at the distance, trying to decide whether something was coming toward us. My mom stayed close to me. I think she may have held my hand or kept her arm around me. I remember feeling safer because she was there, but I also remember noticing that she was not acting completely normal. She was trying to stay calm, but she kept looking out the window. That made me more nervous. When you are a child, you look to adults to tell you whether something is dangerous. If your mom is relaxed, you relax. If your mom is uneasy, you know something is wrong, even if she does not say it out loud. The waiting felt like hours. Looking back now, it was probably around 20 minutes. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But when you are 6 or 7 years old, trapped in a dark shuttle at night, 20 minutes can feel endless. Time does not move normally when you are scared. A minute becomes 5 minutes. 5 minutes becomes an hour. Every time you think help should be there, it is not there yet. I remember asking again when someone was coming. I remember my mom telling me they would come soon. I remember staring at the front of the shuttle, hoping the lights would suddenly blink back on. They did not. Eventually, we saw headlights in the distance. At first, I was not sure if they were coming toward us. The light was small and far away, moving slowly across the dark field. Then, it got brighter. It became clear that it was some kind of airport service truck. I remember feeling relief before the truck even reached us. Just seeing another vehicle meant we were not forgotten. The truck drove up beside the shuttle, and the headlights shined through the windows. After sitting in darkness for so long, that light felt almost painfully bright. It lit up the inside of the car enough for me to see my mom clearly again. It showed the seats, our bags, the doors, and the windows that had looked so black before. There were airport workers outside. I do not remember what they looked like or exactly what they said. I only remember that they were there, and that meant everything was finally normal again. They were adults in uniforms or work clothes, people who knew what to do. They were not scared. They did not act like anything strange had happened. To them, it was probably just a broken shuttle. They worked on the train for a while. Maybe they opened something at the front. Maybe they spoke into radios. Maybe they checked the doors and the electrical system. I remember hearing movement outside and seeing lights flashing through the windows. The darkness was no longer complete because the service truck lights were shining nearby. Eventually, the shuttle lights came back on. I remember blinking because the inside suddenly looked so ordinary again. The seats were just seats. The doors were just doors. The windows showed an empty field, but it no longer looked like some huge unknown place. It was still nighttime, but now there were workers outside, lights around us, and the feeling that someone was in control. The doors opened. I do not remember whether we got off the shuttle and into another vehicle, or whether the train started moving again after the repair. I only remember that we finally made it back to the parking area and got to our car. I remember being relieved to sit inside our own vehicle, where there were normal lights, normal doors, and no strange silence. The drive home probably felt quiet. I do not remember much about it, but I imagine my mom and I talked about what happened. Maybe she laughed a little because of the weird timing. Maybe she said she could not believe she had just said that. Maybe she tried to make it into something less frightening once it was over, but I never forgot it. I have thought about it many times as I got older. Of course, I know there was probably a normal explanation. Airport shuttles break down, electrical systems fail, trains stop, lights go out. Those things happen. There was probably a maintenance problem that had nothing to do with us. Maybe the shuttle had already been having issues before we got on. Maybe a sensor failed. Maybe something shorted out. Maybe it was just bad timing. But the timing is what makes it impossible for me to dismiss completely. My mom did not say something vague, like, "What if something goes wrong?" She did not say, "What if this breaks down?" She said, "Wouldn't it be weird if this train stopped and the lights turned off?" Then, almost immediately, the train stopped and the lights turned off. Maybe it was a coincidence. It probably was, but it was the kind of coincidence that feels too perfect to be comfortable. Even now, when I think about it, I can picture the field outside the windows. I can remember the dark glass, the faint airport lights in the distance, and the feeling of being completely alone in the middle of nowhere, even though we were technically still at a major airport. I remember the locked doors. I remember the silence after the train stopped. I remember the lights going out, and I remember my mom's voice right before it happened. Wouldn't it be weird if this train stopped and the lights turned off? It was weird. It was more than weird. For a 6 or 7-year-old kid sitting in a dark train car in the middle of a field, it was one of the creepiest moments of my life. My dad died from a heart attack. My mom and he had been driving back from Ohio when it happened. They were on I-75 South in southern Kentucky, somewhere on that long stretch of highway where the road seems to go on forever, through hills, trees, and wide dark spaces between exits. My dad was in the passenger seat. His death was not completely unexpected, at least not in the way some sudden deaths are. He had been on medical leave for about 6 months before it happened. There had been health problems. There had been doctor visits, worry, uncertainty, and that strange period where everyone knows something is wrong, but still hopes it will somehow turn around. Even when a person has been sick, though, you are never fully ready for the moment when they are gone. You can know it is possible. You can know it may happen. You can even think you have prepared yourself. But when it finally does happen, none of that preparation feels real. My parents had only been living in Georgia for 4 years. Before that, they had spent 53 years in Ohio. Ohio was home in the deeper sense. It was where they had lived most of their lives, where family history was, where old friends were, where familiar roads and familiar stores and familiar faces existed. Georgia was where they had moved later in life, but Ohio was still where everything important seemed to lead back to. So after my dad died, it was decided that the funeral and burial would take place in Ohio. That made sense. It was where he had spent most of his life. It was where people who knew him would be. It was where family could gather. Still, there was something strange and painful about the trip. My parents had been driving back from Ohio when he died, and then only a few days later, my mom and I had to drive from Georgia to Ohio for his funeral. The same general route, the same long highways, the same states, the same direction of travel. Only this time, he was not with us. A few days after he died, my mom and I got into the car and started the drive north. I do not remember every detail about the beginning of that trip. I remember packing. I remember trying to think about practical things, because practical things are easier than grief. Clothes for the funeral, things my mom might need, a bag for the hotel, papers, phone chargers, the small normal items that suddenly feel ridiculous when someone important has just died. I remember that neither of us had much energy. Grief makes everything slow. Even things that should be simple take more effort. You stare at a drawer full of clothes and cannot decide what to bring. You sit down and forget why you stood up. You check the same thing twice. You feel exhausted, but you cannot properly rest. We got a late start that day. Maybe it was because there were too many things to do before we left. Maybe neither of us wanted to begin the drive. Maybe we were simply moving through the day in a fog. Whatever the reason, by the time we got into Tennessee, it was already dark. The plan was probably to drive for a few more hours and then find a hotel for the night. We were not trying to do the entire trip in one stretch. We just wanted to make enough progress that the next day would be easier. At least, that is what I remember thinking. We would keep going until we found a decent exit with a hotel, get some sleep if sleep was possible, then continue into Ohio the next morning. But up in that part of the country, especially along I-75, there can be long stretches between exits. Sometimes 8 or 10 miles go by before you see another place to stop. At night, those miles feel longer. When you are tired and watching the road, you start looking for exit signs early. You notice every gas station sign in the distance. You watch the numbers count down slowly. It had started to rain a little. Not a hard storm, not the kind where windshield wipers are fighting to keep up. It was more like light rain, just enough to make the road shine under the headlights. The drops hit the windshield in a soft, steady pattern. Every now and then, the wipers moved across the glass and cleared the water away, only for more drops to collect again. The road was dark. There were other cars around, but not many. Some passed us quickly in the left lane. Others were far ahead, their red taillights small and blurry through the damp air. Trucks moved through the night with their huge white trailers reflecting light. But between the cars, there were long stretches where it felt like we were alone on the highway. My mom was driving. I do not remember much of what we talked about that night. We may have talked about the funeral. We may have talked about family members who would be there. We may have talked about things that needed to be done when we arrived. Or maybe we were mostly quiet. There are times after someone dies when silence is easier than conversation. You do not want to say the wrong thing. You do not want to bring up a memory that will make the other person cry, even though you are already thinking about it yourself. You do not want to pretend everything is normal, but you also do not know how to sit inside the reality that it is not. I remember looking out the passenger side window at the dark trees and wet road. The highway lights were spaced far apart. Sometimes there were no lights at all, except for the headlights of passing cars and the reflective markers along the road. The rain made everything look slightly blurred. The pavement reflected the beams of our headlights like a long strip of dark glass. We were getting close to the Kentucky border when I saw him. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. There was a figure walking along the side of the highway. That alone was strange. You do not expect to see a person walking along a dark interstate at night, especially in the rain, especially in a rural part of Tennessee or near the Kentucky border, where there are long stretches with nothing around. It was not a road where someone would casually be taking a walk. There were no sidewalks, no houses nearby, no store or gas station in sight. Just highway, trees, wet grass, and darkness. But what made it stranger was the way he was moving. He was on crutches. He was walking fast, not limping slowly, not struggling along the shoulder, not standing near the edge of the road looking for help. He was moving with purpose. He was really moving. He seemed to be going almost as fast as someone jogging. I remember seeing the crutches first, or at least noticing the motion they made. They struck the ground in a quick, steady rhythm as he moved along the shoulder. There was something unnatural about the speed. Someone on crutches should not have been moving that quickly, especially not on wet ground beside a dark highway. And then I noticed the bandages. He looked bandaged from head to toe. Not just a bandage around one arm or one leg, not a cast, not a sling. His whole body looked wrapped. He reminded me of a cartoon version of someone who had been badly injured and placed in traction at a hospital, wrapped in white bandages everywhere except for maybe part of the face. It looked like a mummy. That is the clearest way I can describe it. Not an actual ancient mummy, obviously. It looked like a person covered in white hospital-style wrappings, almost from head to toe. The kind of image you see in old cartoons when someone has been in some huge accident and comes out of the hospital completely wrapped. For a moment, I wondered if my mind was filling in details because of the rain and darkness. The highway lights and headlights can distort things. A person wearing pale clothes could look strange. Reflective strips could flash in the rain. A blanket, coat, or medical wrap could look bigger from a moving car. I know all that. I have thought about it many times. But in that moment, I did not think I was seeing a trick. I thought I was seeing a person on crutches, moving very quickly along the side of the interstate, completely wrapped in bandages. He was not trying to hitch a ride. That is another thing I remember clearly. He did not have his thumb out. He was not waving. He was not facing traffic like someone asking for help. He was not standing still and hoping somebody would stop. He was moving forward with his head down, using the crutches quickly, almost urgently. It looked as though he had somewhere to be and was determined to get there. We passed him. The whole sighting lasted only a few seconds, maybe less. By the time I fully understood what I had seen, we were already moving beyond him. I looked back through the side mirror, but the darkness and rain swallowed the shoulder behind us almost immediately. For a second, I said nothing. I was trying to make sense of it. I wondered whether I had really seen what I thought I saw. I wondered whether my eyes had mistaken something on the roadside for a person. Maybe it was a road worker. Maybe it was someone wearing some kind of bright emergency gear. Maybe it was a person with a white rain poncho and crutches. But none of those explanations fit well. The person was alone. There was no disabled car nearby. There was no emergency vehicle. There were no flashing lights. There was no exit close enough that I could see. There was no reason for someone who looked badly injured to be moving that fast along the side of I-75 in light rain, in the dark, miles from anything. I turned to my mom and asked if she had seen him. I do not remember the exact words I used. Maybe I said, "Did you see that guy?" Maybe I asked, "Did you see the person on crutches?" But I remember looking at her because I needed to know whether I had imagined it. She said she saw him too. That was enough to make me sit up straighter. At least I had not been alone in seeing something strange. My mom did not say much more than that. At least not that I remember. We were both tired. We were both dealing with my dad's death. We were driving in the dark, and neither of us was in the mood to turn the moment into some big story. We may have briefly talked about how odd it was, then moved on because there was nothing we could do about it. We were already past him. There was no safe way to turn around. There was no reason to stop on the side of the interstate. And even if we had stopped, what would we have done? Offer him a ride? Ask whether he needed help? Call someone? It all seemed impossible in that moment because the sighting had happened so fast. We kept driving. The rain continued to hit the windshield. The wipers moved back and forth. The highway stretched ahead of us. But after that, I kept thinking about the person on the crutches. I imagined him still moving along the road behind us. I imagined the white bandages catching light from the headlights of passing cars. I imagined him moving quickly through the rain, alone on that highway, with no visible destination. It made no sense. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. A person on crutches usually moves carefully. They watch their footing. They move slowly, especially in wet conditions. The shoulder of an interstate is not a safe place to walk under normal circumstances. It is uneven in places, covered in debris, and dangerous because cars and trucks rush past at high speed. Someone who was bandaged head to toe should have been in a hospital bed, not moving through the night beside a highway. And yet, he seemed fast. That is the detail that has stayed with me most strongly. He was not dragging himself. He was not stumbling. He was moving with purpose, almost like he was jogging. The crutches moved with him in a quick, practiced rhythm. His body leaned forward. He was headed somewhere. Years have passed since that night. Decades, really. And now I cannot say with complete certainty that I described every detail to my mom afterward and confirmed that she saw exactly the same thing. I cannot honestly say that I cross-examined her in the moment. I did not ask, did he look like he was covered in bandages from head to toe? I did not ask, did you see the crutches? I did not ask, did he look like a person in traction from a cartoon hospital scene? Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had been older, less exhausted, less distracted by grief, I would have asked more questions. I would have tried to compare every detail while it was fresh. But I did not. We were on our way to bury my father. I was tired. My mom had just lost her husband. The strange person on the side of the road was not the most important thing in our lives that night. Still, I asked if she saw him, and she said yes. That has always mattered to me. I am not saying I saw something supernatural. I do not know what I saw. I have never claimed it was a ghost. I have never said it was some kind of spirit walking the highway. I assume it was a real person. The simplest explanation is that it was someone on crutches moving along a dark highway. Maybe there was a strange but normal reason he looked bandaged. Maybe he had just left a hospital. Maybe he had been in an accident. Maybe he was wearing medical wraps for burns or injuries. Maybe he had escaped from somewhere. Maybe he had been stranded and was trying to reach the next exit. There are always possible explanations. But even with all of those possibilities, the image still feels bizarre. Why was he alone? Why was he moving so fast? Why was he walking on that stretch of interstate in the rain and darkness? Why did he look completely wrapped in bandages? Why did he not try to get help? Why did he seem to be in such a hurry? I have gone back over the location in my mind many times. I-75 south through southern Kentucky is a road I have traveled more than once. It has long stretches where the trees close in and the road feels isolated, especially at night. There are places where you can drive for miles without seeing much, besides signs, dark hills, and the glow of distant headlights. In daylight, it would probably seem ordinary. At night, in light rain, while grieving and driving toward a funeral, it felt like another world. Maybe grief made everything feel heavier. Maybe being tired made the image stick more sharply in my mind. Maybe the darkness turned a normal person into something strange. But I do not think I imagined him. My mom saw him too. And no matter how many times I try to explain it, I always come back to the same memory. A figure on the side of the highway, moving quickly on crutches, wrapped in white from head to toe, not asking for help, not waving at cars, not standing still, just moving, fast, purposeful, alone in the rain. It was one of those moments that lasts only a few seconds, but stays in your head for the rest of your life. There was no dramatic ending. We did not see him again. We did not hear anything else that night. We did not stop and investigate. We kept driving toward Ohio, toward my dad's funeral, toward the reality that he was gone. But every now and then, even now, I think about that dark stretch of highway. I think about the wet pavement and the glow of headlights. I think about how far apart the exits were. And I think about the man on crutches, wrapped like a mummy, moving faster than he should have been able to move. I still do not know what I saw. But I know I saw something. My boyfriend rented a house once that looked almost too good to be true. It was charming, well-built, and located in a neighborhood where most places cost far more than he could normally afford. The street was quiet, lined with mature trees and older homes that had been cared for over the years. The house itself had a solid, comfortable look to it. It was not huge, but it had character. The front porch had old wood railings, the windows were large, and the rooms inside had the kind of details that made the place feel warmer than a newer apartment or townhouse. The rent was strangely cheap. Even at the time, he knew it was lower than it should have been for that area. He had looked at enough places to understand that. Most rentals in that neighborhood were either expensive or gone almost immediately. But when he asked about the price, the answer was simple enough. The owner wanted someone in the house quickly. There had been a gap between tenants. The paperwork was straightforward. Nothing about the lease sounded strange. He did not question it much. He was happy to have found a place that seemed safe, clean, and affordable. He had been looking for somewhere he could settle for a while, and this house seemed perfect. It had enough room for his furniture, a driveway for his car, a small yard, and a neighborhood that felt peaceful. He thought he had gotten lucky. At first, everything was normal. Moving in took time. He had furniture to arrange, boxes to stack, and rooms to clean. Like most people, he did not unpack everything in the first few days. Some boxes stayed sealed in one of the downstairs rooms. Others were placed against walls until he had time to decide where things belonged. The house felt unfamiliar at first, but that was normal. Every new place has its own sounds. Pipes make noises. Old floors creak. The heating system turns on at odd times. Doors settle in their frames. A house that has been empty for a while can feel strange until you get used to it. He did not think much of the small noises in the beginning. Then, not long after he moved in, something happened while he was leaving for the day. He had gotten into his car and was backing out of the driveway. It was daytime, and there was nothing unusual about the weather or the street. He was doing what people do when they back out of a driveway, checking his mirrors, looking over his shoulder, making sure there were no cars coming and no one walking past the house. As he turned his head to look behind him, he saw a woman and a young child standing on the porch. They were close enough that he could make them out clearly. The woman stood near the front door and the child was beside her. They were not waving. They were not moving. They were just standing there, facing toward him. For 1 second, he thought maybe they were visitors. That was the normal explanation. Maybe someone had come up to the door while he was getting into the car. Maybe a neighbor had stopped by. Maybe the woman needed something and had not knocked yet. But the moment he saw them, something about the sight made him feel wrong. He snapped his head back around. The porch was empty. There was no woman. There was no child. There was no movement near the front door. No one walking down the steps. No one moving along the side of the house. He looked again, then looked through the mirrors, trying to see whether they had gone around the corner or stepped out of sight. Nothing. The porch was completely empty. He sat there for a moment with the car still in reverse, trying to understand what had happened. It had not been a quick shadow in the corner of his eye. He had looked directly at them. He had seen 2 people standing on the porch. Then, in the time it took to turn his head away and back, they were gone. He got out of the car and checked. He walked up to the porch. He looked around the front of the house. He checked the side yard and the walkway. There was nobody there. No one had knocked. No one had left a note. There was no sound of someone walking away. The street itself was quiet. He eventually got back into his car and left, telling himself that he must have been mistaken. Maybe he had seen something reflected in the window. Maybe a passing shadow had formed a shape that looked human. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he had been looking too quickly. But the image stayed with him. A woman and a child, standing still on the porch, close enough to see, then gone. A few days later, he was upstairs when he heard a strange rattling sound coming from downstairs. At first, it did not sound serious. It was the kind of noise that could have come from a loose window, a cabinet door, or something shifting in the kitchen. The house was older, and older houses make strange sounds. He assumed that was all it was. But the sound continued. It was not a soft rattle. It grew louder. It came in sharp bursts, as though something was shaking or being hit over and over. He stood still for a moment and listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It was downstairs. He walked toward the stairs, listening carefully. The noise seemed to be coming from the kitchen. As he got closer, it became louder and more violent. It was not the sound of a pipe. It was not the sound of something falling. It sounded like something large was moving against glass. He went down the stairs. By the time he reached the bottom, the rattling was loud enough that he could feel it in the room. It was coming from the kitchen, near the back of the house. He approached the kitchen door slowly. The sound had become so intense that he expected to find something broken. Maybe a window had come loose in the wind. Maybe a tree branch was hitting the house. Maybe an animal had somehow gotten trapped near the back doors. He opened the kitchen door. The sliding glass doors were shaking violently. They were not just vibrating a little. They were moving hard enough that it looked like the entire wall was being hit. The glass rattled in its frame. The doors shuddered back and forth. The sound filled the kitchen, sharp and heavy. For a second, he thought there had been an earthquake. But nothing else was moving. The cabinets were still. The dishes on the counter were still. The hanging light did not sway. The floor beneath him did not shake. Only the sliding doors were moving. He stood there, frozen, watching them shake, as if some invisible force had grabbed them from the outside. He looked through the glass toward the yard, expecting to see someone pushing on them or something hitting the door. There was nothing. The backyard was empty. No person stood on the patio. No animal was scratching at the glass. No branch was striking the doors. No storm was blowing through. The weather was calm. The doors shook for several more seconds, then stopped. Just like that. The kitchen became quiet again. He checked the lock. He checked the frame. He looked outside. Nothing was damaged. There was no sign that anyone had been there. No footprints that he could see. No broken glass. No loose object nearby that could have caused it. He told himself there had to be a reason. Maybe the track was loose. Maybe the house had shifted. Maybe a passing truck had caused a vibration. But even as he tried to explain it, he knew the explanation did not feel right. He had watched the doors move. It had looked like something was trying to get in. After that, he became more aware of the house. He noticed how quiet it could get at night. He noticed the way the upstairs hallway seemed darker than it should have been, even with the lights on. He noticed that some rooms felt colder than others for no clear reason. Still, he did not decide the house was haunted. He did not start looking for ghosts. He was practical. He did not want to turn every strange sound into a mystery. He kept living his life, went to work, came home, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that had started to settle over the place. Then he began hearing a buzzing sound. It was not constant. That made it worse. Sometimes he would be sitting downstairs and hear a faint buzzing somewhere in the house. Other times, it would happen while he was in bed at night. It came and went without a pattern. It was not loud enough to identify right away, but it was noticeable. It had a strange electric quality to it, like an appliance running or a bathroom fan turning on somewhere behind a closed door. At first, he thought it might be coming from the walls. Older houses often have electrical problems, and he thought maybe there was a loose wire or a faulty fixture. He started checking different rooms when he heard it. He listened near outlets. He checked the kitchen appliances. He looked around the laundry area. The sound always seemed to disappear before he could find it. Then one day, he heard it again and followed it carefully. It was coming from upstairs. He moved through the hallway, listening. The buzz was louder there. He stopped near a bathroom door that had been closed since he moved in. It was a bathroom he had not even opened yet. The house had more rooms than he immediately needed, and there were doors he had simply left shut while he unpacked. This bathroom was one of them. He had never used it. He had never looked inside. It was just another closed room in a house he was still getting used to. But the buzzing was definitely coming from behind that door. He stood there for a moment, listening. Then he opened it. The bathroom was empty. At first, everything looked ordinary. There was a sink, a toilet, a bathtub, and an old shower curtain. But then the buzzing stopped, and the shower suddenly turned on. Water blasted from the shower head at full force. He jumped back. The sound of the water filled the room. It was loud, hitting the tub and splashing against the curtain. The shower was running hard enough that it sounded like someone had turned the handle all the way. Then, just as suddenly, it shut off. The bathroom went silent. He stared at the shower. A few seconds later, it turned on again. Full force. Then off. Then on. Then off. It kept happening as if someone invisible was reaching in and twisting the handle back and forth. There was no person in the bathroom. No one was hiding behind the curtain. No one was in the room next door. He checked everything. The door had been closed. He was alone in that part of the house. The water ran hard, shut off, then ran again. He eventually managed to stop it, though he was never sure how. Maybe he shut off a valve. Maybe the handle finally stayed in place. But by then, he was deeply unsettled. A plumbing problem was one thing. Old pipes could make noises, water pressure could behave strangely. But a shower turning itself on and off at full force, in a room he had not even entered before, felt different. It felt deliberate. After that, he started spending less time in the house. He would stay out later than usual. He would go to friends' houses, run errands he did not really need to run, or find excuses not to be home alone. He did not tell everyone what was happening because he knew how it would sound. He did not want people to think he was overreacting. He did not want to be the person claiming that his cheap rental was haunted after only a few strange incidents. But the house kept giving him reasons to be afraid. The worst thing happened with the water. One day, a major leak appeared somewhere inside the house. It was not a small drip under a sink. It was not a little water stain on the ceiling. It was enough water to cause real flooding. The strange part was where the water went. The house had been built in a way that should have made the flooding predictable. The stairs and floors sloped so that water would naturally run down and spread out. If there was a leak upstairs or in one area, it should have flowed toward the lower parts of the house and dispersed. But that was not what happened. Instead, the water flooded only one room, the room where he had stacked all of his packed boxes. It was the room where he had put the belongings he had not unpacked yet. Books, clothes, old keepsakes, personal items, things that had been packed away during the move and left there until he had time to organize them. The rest of the house was mostly spared. The water did not spread the way it should have. It did not flow naturally down the stairs or move into the other rooms in the way anyone would expect. It seemed to find that one room. The boxes were soaked. Some of them collapsed. Some of the things inside were ruined. He had to pull everything out, check what could be saved, and deal with the mess. It was frustrating, expensive, and exhausting. But more than that, it felt personal. That was what bothered him. The water had gone where it could do the most damage. By then, his girlfriend at the time had started spending more time at the house. At first, she did not know all the details. He told her about the sliding doors and the shower, but he tried to make it sound less serious than it felt. He did not want to scare her. But she began experiencing things herself. When she was alone in the house, she sometimes heard children calling her name. It did not happen every day. It happened just often enough that she could not ignore it. She would be in another room, folding laundry or looking at her phone, and hear a child's voice say her name. It was not loud. It was not coming from outside. It sounded like it was inside the house, close enough that she would stop what she was doing and look around. At first, she thought maybe it was a neighbor's kid. Then she thought it might be the television, or a sound from outside carrying through a window. But there were times when the house was quiet. No television, no nearby voices, no open windows, no children outside. And still, she would hear her name. Sometimes the voice sounded like it came from the hallway. Sometimes it seemed to come from upstairs. Sometimes it was close enough that she would turn around, expecting to see someone standing behind her. But no one was ever there. She tried to brush it off. She did not want to believe something was wrong with the house. She told herself it could be stress. She told herself that after hearing his stories, she was becoming too aware of every sound. She tried to be logical, but the feeling in the house got worse. Then one day, she was getting a ride home with a colleague. It was a normal drive at first. They were talking casually about work and everyday things. At some point, the subject of moving came up, and she mentioned that she had recently been spending time at her boyfriend's new rental. She may have mentioned the neighborhood or the street. She may have described the house without thinking much about it. Her colleague's face changed. He went pale. He asked her whether she knew what had happened there. She did not understand what he meant. He asked again, more seriously, whether she knew about the murder in that area. He told her that years earlier, a woman and a young child had been drowned in a bathtub. She felt sick immediately. She asked him where it had happened. He did not answer right away. Instead, he said he would drive her by the place. She may have assumed he meant a house nearby. Maybe she thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood, on another street or a few blocks away. But as they drove, she realized he was taking the familiar route. He turned onto her street. He slowed down, and he drove straight to the house, her boyfriend's house, the same house where he had seen a woman and a child standing on the porch, the same house where the sliding doors had shaken violently with no one outside, the same house where the shower turned itself on and off, the same house where the water had flooded the room full of his belongings, the same house where she had heard children calling her name when she was alone. Her colleague told her that was the place. That was where the woman and the child had died. They had been drowned in the bathtub. There was no dramatic debate after that. They did not spend days trying to investigate. They did not stay another night to see whether anything else happened. They moved out the next day. He left behind the cheap rent, the charming house, and the neighborhood he had once thought was perfect. Whatever deal he had thought he found was not worth staying there any longer. Sometimes, the price of a house is low for a reason, and sometimes you do not find out that reason until it is already too late. We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal. My friend from childhood lived in a house that backed right up against a graveyard. It was one of those old neighborhoods where the cemetery had probably been there long before most of the homes around it. The house itself was close enough that you could see the gravestones from parts of the yard, especially when the trees were bare in the winter. There was a fence between the property and the cemetery, but it never really made the graveyard feel far away. It was always there in the background. When we were younger, we thought it was creepy in the normal way kids think anything near a graveyard is creepy. We would look through the fence, dare each other to walk closer to it at night, and make up stories about who might be buried there. During the day, it was not especially frightening. It was just an old cemetery with rows of stones, trees, and patches of uneven grass. But once the sun went down, the whole area changed. The shadows from the headstones stretched across the ground. The trees made dark shapes against the sky. the house would feel quieter somehow, as though the graveyard absorbed every sound around it. My friend had lived there for a long time, and her family had gotten used to the strange little things that happened from time to time. Nothing huge, nothing that made anyone run out of the house or call a priest or anything like that. It was more like the usual creepy stuff people talk about when they live in an old house. Doors would sometimes open or close without anyone touching them. Floors would creak when nobody was walking across them. Someone might hear a small sound upstairs and assume another family member was there, only to find the room empty. There were nights when the house made more noises than usual, especially when the weather changed or the wind pushed against the old windows. Most of the time, everybody explained it away. Old houses settle. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes make sounds. A door that does not latch properly can move on its own. People hear things differently at night. Those were all reasonable explanations, and nobody in the family seemed interested in turning every small noise into a ghost story. Still, when you grow up around a house like that, you notice things. You remember the times you heard footsteps in the hallway when everyone was downstairs. You remember the bedroom door that slowly opened after you were sure you shut it. You remember the feeling of walking past a dark room and thinking, just for 1 second, that someone was standing inside. Her house had that kind of feeling. Not always, not every day, but enough that we all knew it had a certain atmosphere. Then, while she was in college, her dad passed away in his sleep in that house. It happened quietly. There was no warning that night, no big scene, no sound that woke the whole house. He went to sleep and did not wake up. Even saying it that way still feels strange, because it sounds so simple for something that changes everything. Her dad had been one of those familiar adults who was always part of the background of our childhood. He was there when we came over after school. He was there when we got dropped off at the house. He was the kind of parent you saw so many times that you stopped thinking of him as someone who could ever be gone. Then suddenly, he was. News traveled fast through our friend group. We had all grown up together, and even though some of us had moved away for college or started jobs in different places, we still felt connected. When something happened to one of us, especially something that serious, everyone knew they needed to come home. So we did. We came back to be with her brothers, and her mom. Some of us drove in that same day. Others arrived later. People brought food, drinks, blankets, and whatever else they thought might help, even though none of us really knew what could help. When somebody dies, people bring things because they do not know what else to do. They bring casseroles, coffee, paper plates, bottled water, and bags of snacks. They offer rides. They offer to stay. They offer to sit silently in the same room if that is what the family needs. That night, the house was full. There were probably around 11 of us in the living room altogether. Some people sat on couches, others sat in chairs or on the floor. A few people leaned against the walls or stood near the kitchen doorway. It was the kind of gathering where nobody was really comfortable, but nobody wanted to leave either. Everyone was exhausted. Some people were crying quietly. Some people were staring at their phones without really looking at them. Some were talking in low voices, telling stories about her dad, trying to bring up good memories without making things harder. Others sat in silence because they did not know what to say. The living room lights were on, but the house still felt dim. It was late, and the lamps gave the room a soft yellow glow. The rest of the house beyond the living room looked darker. The hallway seemed longer than usual. The stairs leading upstairs were barely visible from where most of us sat. Outside, the graveyard was hidden in the darkness behind the house, but just knowing it was there made the night feel heavier. We were waiting for a few more friends to arrive. People had been coming in and out all evening, so when there was a knock at the front door, nobody thought much of it at first. It was a normal knock, Not loud enough to make anyone jump. Not violent or repeated. Just the kind of knock you hear when someone has arrived and does not want to walk in without being invited. We all heard it clearly. My friend's brother got up to answer the door. At that moment, I was sitting on one of the couches with another friend. The two of us were in a spot where we had a direct view of the front door and the narrow side windows beside it. Those windows ran along part of the entrance and gave us a clear enough look at the porch outside. We were far enough away that we could not see every detail perfectly. The porch light was on, and it created that washed-out look people get when they are standing too close under a bright outdoor bulb. The light was strong enough that it made the person outside look pale, almost glowing against the darkness beyond the porch. But there was definitely someone there. A figure stood on the porch, dressed entirely in white. At first, I assumed it was one of the last friends we were expecting. That was the most obvious explanation. We had been waiting for more people. The person looked like they were standing still, waiting for someone to open the door. Maybe they were wearing a white hoodie, white jacket, or light-colored clothes that looked bright under the porch light. The person was standing close enough to the front door that I thought there was no question about it. My friend beside me saw them too. Neither of us said anything right away because there was nothing unusual about someone being on the porch. We had heard the knock. Someone was expected. Her brother was walking toward the door. Then he stopped. He was only a few steps away from it when he looked toward the side window and said, "Oh, no one's there." His voice was calm. He did not sound scared. It sounded like he was simply correcting himself, as though he had looked out and noticed that whoever knocked had already walked away. But my friend and I looked at each other immediately. "What are you talking about?" one of us said. We could still see the person standing there. They had not moved. They were right on the porch. I remember feeling confused before I felt afraid. Her brother was closer to the door than we were. If he said there was nobody there, maybe he was seeing something we could not. Maybe the angle was different. Maybe the person had stepped to one side. But from where we were sitting, through those narrow side windows, it looked obvious. Someone was standing on the porch. We told him again. "They're right there," we said. "Go let them in." I do not remember which of us said it first or exactly how we phrased it. I only remember the feeling that we were trying to tell him he was being weird. We assumed he was mistaken. We thought maybe he was looking at the wrong spot or had not noticed the person because of the porch light. The figure did not move. It stayed in the same place, directly outside the door. The door opened inward. That is the detail that still makes the whole thing impossible for me to explain. The front door opened toward the inside of the house. As my friend's brother pulled it open, the door swung across the area of the window we had been looking through. For a moment, the open door completely blocked our view of the figure outside. We could not see the porch anymore. We could only see the inside of the front door as it opened wide. It happened quickly. The door did not take long to swing open. Maybe a second, maybe less. Then the doorway was clear. The porch was empty. There was no person standing there. No one was stepping off the porch. No one was walking down the front path. No white clothing moving away into the dark. No friend standing, just out of view. Nothing. The porch light shone down on bare wooden boards. The front steps were empty. The walkway beyond the porch disappeared into darkness, but there was no sign that anyone had left. The person had simply vanished. It was not like they turned and ran away. It was not like they ducked around the side of the house. We were looking directly at the exact place where they had been standing, and there was nowhere they could have gone in that short amount of time. 1 second, there was a solid human figure on the porch. The next second, there was no one. For a few moments, nobody said anything. Her brother stood in the open doorway looking out at the porch. He looked confused, but not in the same way we were. He had already believed nobody was there. To him, the open door only confirmed it. but my friend and I were staring at the empty porch like something had been taken away in front of us. We both started talking at once. Someone was there. They were right there. I saw them. You saw them too, right? We kept repeating it because we could not make our brains accept what had happened. It was not a vague shape. It was not a reflection. It was not something we had both half seen in the corner of our eyes. It was a person, a real-looking person, standing in full view on the porch, dressed in white, then gone. Other people in the living room started asking what happened. They had heard the knock, and they saw the brother open the door, but they had not been sitting at the same angle as us. They had not seen the side windows. Some of them thought it was possible that whoever knocked had already left. Maybe it had been a neighbor. Maybe it had been someone who got the wrong house. Maybe it had been one of the friends who thought better of coming in. But my friend and I knew that was not what happened. The person had been standing there as the door opened. There was no time for them to leave. We tried to explain it. We told everyone that the figure was still on the porch when her brother started opening the door. We said the porch light made it hard to see details, but we could see the shape clearly. We described the white clothing. We described how the person was standing in the middle of the porch, close to the door. Someone asked whether it could have been a reflection in the window. That was the first logical explanation people came up with, but I do not think it was. The living room lights were behind us, yes, but the shape we saw looked outside. It was positioned on the porch, under the porch light. It did not move with us. It did not look like a reflection of anyone in the room. It was a full figure, solid and upright. There was no person inside wearing white who could have made that reflection anyway. Someone else suggested that maybe the person had crouched down or stepped behind the railing. That did not make sense either. The porch was open. There was nowhere to hide. Even if someone had moved quickly, we should have seen some part of them. A shoulder, a white sleeve, a foot going down the stairs. But there was nothing. The porch was completely empty. What made it more unsettling was the timing. We were gathered in that house because her father had just died there the night before. The whole house was full of grief. Everyone was raw and tired. The usual sounds of the house felt louder. Every creak in the floor made people look up. Every shadow in the hallway seemed deeper, and the house backed up to a graveyard. Normally, that detail might sound dramatic, like something added to make a ghost story more interesting, but it was simply true. The cemetery had always been there. It had always been part of the house's atmosphere. We had all joked about it when we were younger. That night, no one joked. After the figure vanished, the energy in the room changed. People tried to keep talking. Some of us moved closer together. Someone shut the door and checked the lock. Someone looked through the window again. A few people went outside briefly to look around the porch and the front yard. There was nobody there. The yard was quiet. The street was quiet. The house across the road had a porch light on, but there was no movement outside. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the distant noise of cars far away. I remember feeling strange about going near the front door after that. It was not that I thought the person was still there. It was that I could not stop imagining them standing in the exact same spot, just beyond the glass. The porch light continued to shine. Every time I looked toward the door, I expected to see white fabric through the window again. But I never did. The rest of the night passed in a blur. More friends arrived eventually, although after what happened, every knock at the door made me tense up. Whenever someone came in, I found myself checking through the side window first. I wanted to see them clearly before the door opened. I did not want that same feeling again, where I knew someone was there and then suddenly they were not. We did not talk about the figure constantly. There were bigger things happening. Our friend had lost her father. Her mom and brothers were dealing with the first night after his death. People were trying to be supportive. Some friends were making coffee, others were organizing food or helping clean up. But the moment at the door stayed in the back of my mind. It stayed with my other friend too. Every now and then, one of us would look at the other and quietly say something like, "You saw that, right?" And the other one would say yes. That became important to me. I was not alone. I did not have to rely only on my own memory. The person sitting beside me had seen the exact same thing. We both had the same view. We both heard the knock. We both saw the figure in white through the side windows. We both watched the door swing open. We both watched the porch become empty. For years afterward, I have thought about that moment. I have tried to find a normal explanation. I have wondered whether grief and exhaustion made us see something that was not there. Maybe we were both looking at a reflection and interpreted it the same way because we expected someone to arrive. Maybe the porch light and the glass created some strange effect. Maybe someone really had been there and moved away faster than we realized. But none of those explanations feels right. The person looked solid. They did not appear for a split second. They stood there long enough for both of us to see them, recognize them as a human figure, and assume they were one of our friends. We had time to tell her brother that someone was waiting outside. We had time to feel confused when he said nobody was there. Then the door opened, and they were gone. There was something about the way it happened that felt too clear. If I had only seen the figure by myself, I might have convinced myself that I imagined it. If it had been late at night with nobody else around, I might have blamed the darkness, the porch light, or the stress of everything happening in the house. But the other friend saw it too. We both reacted immediately. We both kept repeating the same thing. Someone was there. They were absolutely there. I still cannot wrap my mind around it. It remains the wildest thing I have ever experienced. Not because it was loud or violent, not because something attacked anyone or broke anything. It was terrifying because it was so simple. A person stood at the door. The door opened. The person disappeared, clear as day. 1 second, a solid human figure was standing on the porch. The next second, there was nothing there at all. I was lying in my room on my back, staring through the window. That part is important because I almost never sleep on my back. I have always slept on my stomach. Even as a kid, I would usually turn over without thinking and fall asleep face down or partly on my side. Sleeping flat on my back has never been comfortable for me. So the fact that I was lying that way in the dream and later woke up in that exact same position has always bothered me. In the dream, everything looked normal at first. My room looked like my room. The window was where it always was. The light outside had that dark nighttime look, where you can still see shapes, but everything beyond the glass is muted and gray. I could see outside clearly enough to recognize the driveway. My dad's car was parked there. It was sitting in the usual spot outside the house, close enough that I could see the top and part of the side from my window. Nothing about it looked strange. It was just his car parked outside at night. I remember feeling calm at first because the whole scene felt completely ordinary. Then a cat jumped onto the car. It landed on the roof or hood with that soft, light movement cats have. It was white with gray spots. I could see its coloring clearly. It was not a shadowy animal or a shape that might have been a cat. It looked like a real cat, close enough that I could make out the patches of gray in its fur. At first I just watched it. Seeing cats outside was not unusual. Cats wander around at night. They climb on cars, fences, walls, porches, and anything else they can get onto. If I had seen a cat like that in real life, I probably would not have thought much about it. But then the cat looked directly at me. It lifted its head and stared straight through the window. That was when the dream changed. I cannot really explain what I mean by a nightmarish face. It was still a cat, but something about its expression felt wrong. Its eyes looked wrong, its mouth looked wrong. Its face seemed stretched into an angry, unnatural expression that no normal cat should be able to make. It looked like it recognized me. It looked like it was not simply looking into the room because it noticed movement. It was staring at me on purpose, like it knew I was watching it and wanted me to understand that it had seen me too. Then it started hissing. The sound felt much louder than it should have. It was not a normal warning hiss from a frightened cat. It sounded harsh and ugly, almost human in the way it carried through the room. I remember feeling my whole body tense up. I did not just feel startled, I felt terrified. The cat stayed on my dad's car, staring at me through the window and hissing. I jumped out of bed. In the dream, I got up quickly and left my room. I remember moving through the hallway in a panic, trying to figure out what was happening. I was scared of the cat outside, but I was even more scared because it felt like the cat had somehow been looking directly into me. Then I saw there were more cats. A bunch of them were gathered outside the house. They were trying to get in. They were around the windows and doors, moving along the outside of the house, scratching and pushing at anything they could reach. I remember the feeling that they were not just wandering around. They were trying to enter. They were focused on getting inside. That was the part that turned the dream from strange to truly frightening. There were cats pressing near the fly screens, cats moving around the windows, cats at the sides of the house. I do not remember every single color or shape, but I remember the number of them. There were enough that it felt unnatural, enough that the house seemed surrounded. One of them eventually cut through the fly net. I remember seeing the screen tear. The small ripping sound felt sharp and clear. The cat forced its way through, and I remember feeling a complete wave of panic. It was like whatever was outside had found a way in. Then I woke up. I woke up so suddenly that for a second I did not understand where I was. I was lying in my room. I was on my back. I was looking through the exact same window. The view outside looked almost identical to the dream. The darkness, the window frame, the outline of the yard or driveway, all of it was the same. My heart was racing so hard that I could feel it in my chest. For a second, I was convinced the dream had continued. I expected to see my dad's car outside. I expected the white cat with gray spots to be standing on it, staring at me. But there was no car. There was no cat. There was nothing outside except the normal darkness. That should have made me feel better. It should have been a relief to realize that it had only been a dream. But it did not feel like a normal dream. It felt too real. The transition from dreaming to waking was too clean. I had gone from lying on my back in the dream, watching that window, to lying on my back in real life, staring at the exact same window. I did not even remember falling asleep on my back. That was one of the things that scared me most. As I said, I never sleep like that. I always sleep on my stomach. I always have. I might wake up on my side sometimes, but waking up flat on my back is rare for me. It was such an unusual position that I noticed it immediately. For a while, I did not move. I just lay there staring at the window. Part of me was afraid that if I blinked, the cat would appear again. Another part of me was afraid to look away because I did not want to imagine it was still there, somewhere just beyond the glass. I remember trying to calm myself down. I probably told myself that it was only a dream. Dreams can be vivid. Dreams can use your real surroundings. Your brain can take the room you are in, the sounds around you, your sleeping position, and turn all of it into something terrifying. That is a normal explanation, but it did not feel normal in the moment. The dream had been too exact. The window was in the same place. My body was in the same position. The darkness outside looked almost the same. It was as if I had not fully left the dream when I woke up, like I had only opened my eyes in the middle of it. I do not know how long I stayed awake after that. It might have been a few minutes. It might have been an hour. When you wake up frightened in the middle of the night, time does not feel normal. You keep listening for sounds. Every little noise in the house becomes important. A pipe creaking can sound like scratching. Wind against a window can sound like something moving outside. I remember being very aware of every sound after that. I listened for the soft landing of paws on the car. I listened for hissing. I listened for scratching at the fly screen. Of course, I did not hear any of those things. But once the image was in my head, it was hard to get rid of it. For a while after that dream, I felt uneasy around the window at night. It was not constant fear. I did not stop sleeping in my room or anything like that. But every now and then, I would wake up and look toward the window without meaning to. I would think about the white cat with gray spots. I would remember the way it looked at me. I would remember the feeling that it was not acting like an animal. I have had plenty of weird dreams in my life. I have had dreams that made no sense. I have had dreams where people I know act strangely. I have had dreams about places that look familiar but are not quite right. I have had dreams where I wake up scared and then quickly realize they were ridiculous. But that one was different. It stayed with me because it felt so close to real life. There was no strange fantasy world in it. I was not flying or being chased through some impossible place. I was in my own room, looking through my own window at a normal driveway. The only thing that changed was the cat, and then, sometime later, I found a kitten. I do not remember exactly where I found her or how she came into my life. I just know that I ended up adopting her. She was small, young, and needed a home. At that point, I was not thinking about the dream. The dream had happened sometime before, and even though it had scared me badly, it was not something I thought about every day. She was just a kitten. At first, she did not look exactly like the cat from the dream. Kittens change a lot as they grow. Their fur can darken or lighten. Their markings become clearer. Their faces change shape. They go from looking tiny and awkward to looking like completely different animals once they are older. I loved her. She became part of my life the way pets do. She had her own habits, her own personality, her own favorite places to sleep. She would sit in windows, hide in strange corners, chase small things across the floor, and act like the house belonged to her. Then, as she grew up, I noticed something. Her coloring looked familiar. She was white with gray spots. At first, I probably did not think much of it. White and gray cats are not rare. There are plenty of cats with those colors. It could have been nothing more than a coincidence. But one day, I looked at her properly. Maybe she was sitting in a certain place. Maybe the light hit her fur in a way that made her markings stand out. Maybe she turned her head and gave me a look that reminded me of that night. And suddenly, I realized she looked exactly like the cat from my dream. Not just similar. Not just, oh, she has the same colors. She looked like the cat I had seen standing on my dad's car. The white fur, the gray spots, the shape of the markings, the general look of her. I got freaked out all over again. It was one of those moments where your body reacts before your mind can make sense of it. I remember feeling cold, like the room had suddenly changed temperature. My stomach dropped. For a second, I was back in my bedroom, lying on my back, staring through the window at that cat hissing at me. I knew it was irrational. I knew this was a real kitten that I had found and adopted. She was not some nightmare creature. She was not trying to hurt me. She was just a cat. But the resemblance was so exact that it made me uneasy. I began looking at her differently for a while. Not in a way where I was afraid of her all the time. I cared about her. I fed her, played with her, and looked after her. But sometimes I would catch her looking at me from across the room, especially at night, and I would feel that old fear come back for a second. Cats can stare in a way that feels intense, even when they are doing nothing unusual. They sit quietly. They watch. Their eyes reflect light in the dark. They move without making noise. They can appear in a doorway or on the end of a bed and just stand there, looking at you. Most of the time it is completely normal. They are curious. They are waiting for food. They are listening to a sound you cannot hear. They are simply being cats. But after that dream, I noticed every little thing. If she sat near the window, I thought about the car outside. If she hissed at another animal or got startled by a noise, I remembered that awful sound from the dream. If she scratched at a screen or pawed at a door, I remembered the cats trying to get into the house. The dream had given ordinary cat behavior a darker meaning in my mind. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself that dreams pull random details together. Maybe I had seen a white and gray cat somewhere before and forgotten about it. Maybe my brain used that image in the dream, and later I noticed the same coloring in my kitten because it was already stuck in my memory. That is probably the most logical explanation. Still, it felt strange. I have wondered whether the dream was just one of those unusually realistic dreams that happen when you are half awake. Sometimes people wake up inside a dream, or dream that they wake up, or experience their real room while their brain is still dreaming. Maybe that is what happened to me. Maybe I had actually rolled onto my back while I was sleeping, and my brain noticed the position. Maybe I was faintly aware of the window and the darkness outside. Maybe my mind used those real details and created the nightmare around them. That would explain why the dream and reality lined up so perfectly. It would explain why I woke up in the same position. It would explain why the window looked exactly the same. But it does not make it feel any less disturbing. Some dreams are easy to forget because they fall apart as soon as you wake up. You remember fragments, strange places, broken conversations, impossible scenes. Within a few minutes, they fade. This one did not fade. I still remember the face of that cat. I still remember it jumping onto my dad's car. I still remember the way it stared at me through the glass. I still remember the hiss. And I still remember waking up, flat on my back, looking at the same window as if I had never left the dream at all. There have been other times in my life when I woke up suddenly scared and upset, but I could not remember why. That has happened more than once. I would wake up with my heart racing, or with that heavy, sick feeling in my chest, like I had just escaped something terrible. Sometimes I would feel close to tears. Sometimes I would feel angry, confused, or deeply unsettled. But there would be no dream memory, nothing I would try to think back. I would try to hold on to the feeling and figure out what caused it. Did I dream about someone? Did I see something frightening? Did I hear a voice? Was I being chased? Did something happen in the dream that my mind erased before I fully woke up? I never knew. It is strange to wake up upset by something you cannot remember. You are left with the emotion, but not the reason. Your body reacts as if something happened. Your heart is racing. Your muscles are tense. You feel afraid, but your mind gives you nothing. No image, no story, no explanation. That can be more unsettling than a bad dream sometimes. At least with a nightmare, you can say, it was only a dream. You can remember the monster, the place, the person, whatever scared you, and put it into a box in your mind. But when you wake up frightened, with no memory at all, there is nothing to explain away. There is only the feeling. Maybe those moments were also dreams. Maybe I just forgot them quickly. That is probably what happened. Most dreams disappear almost immediately after waking. Sometimes you can feel the fear long after the images are gone. But after the cat dream, I started wondering whether some dreams are more connected to reality than we realize. Not in a supernatural way necessarily. Maybe our minds notice things before we fully understand them. Maybe we see patterns, hear sounds, remember images, and store them somewhere without knowing it. Then our dreams bring them back in ways that feel impossible. Or maybe it was just a nightmare. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I was sleeping in a strange position. Maybe I saw a cat outside at some point, and my brain turned it into something terrifying. Maybe finding a kitten with the same colors later was nothing more than coincidence. I do not know. All I know is that I have never forgotten the feeling of waking up from that dream. The room was dark. The window was in front of me. I was lying on my back, and for one long second, before I realized there was no cat outside, I was completely convinced that the nightmare was still happening. Even now, when I think about it, I can picture that white cat with gray spots staring through the glass. And sometimes, when my cat looks at me from across the room in the middle of the night, I remember it all over again. I was at work when this happened. There were only 3 of us in the secured area that day. Me and 2 co-workers I will call J and K. The room setup is important because it is not an open office where people can wander in and out without anyone noticing. The whole area is very secure. There are several connected rooms, controlled entry points, locked doors, and security measures that make it hard for anyone to come inside unnoticed. You cannot just walk through the building, open a random door, and appear in one of the rooms. People need access, and entries are normally tracked. We were all working in one of the smaller side rooms at first. It was connected to a larger main room, and from there were other connecting rooms. The side room was small enough that if someone moved or left, you would normally notice. It was not one of those huge spaces where people can quietly walk away without anyone seeing them. J and K were both in the side room with me. We were doing regular work, nothing unusual. It was a normal day, and I was focused on what I was doing. The doors were in their usual positions. The room was quiet, except for the normal work sounds, people moving things around, papers or supplies being handled, equipment making whatever low background noise it normally makes. At some point, I needed something from the supply room. The supply room was not far away. It was less than 8 feet from the main room, so it was only a short walk. I left the small side room and headed into the main room to get what I needed. Kay came out around the same time. I do not remember whether she was going somewhere specific or simply leaving the side room too, but I remember that she was with me when I stepped out. I had my hands full. I was looking down as I walked because I was carrying things and trying not to drop anything. I was focused on what I was doing. The supply room was right there, and I was only thinking about grabbing what I needed and getting back to work. Then I heard Kay say my name. It was clear. It was not muffled, distant, or mixed in with other sounds. It sounded like she was speaking at a normal volume, right behind me. Not shouting from another room, not calling through a door, not talking loudly enough for the whole area to hear. It sounded like she had stopped behind me and wanted to ask me something. She said my name in the same way a coworker would say it when they need your attention. The voice sounded like Kay. It was close enough, clear enough, and natural enough that I did not question it at all. I answered immediately. I said, "Hold on a second." I was still carrying things, so I assumed she wanted something or was about to ask me a question. I did not think anything was strange. I expected her to be standing right behind me. Then I turned around. It could not have been more than 2 seconds. Maybe 1 second. Maybe 2. but definitely not long enough for someone to disappear across several rooms without me seeing or hearing them. Kay was not there. The spot directly behind me was empty. At first, I just stood there, confused. My first thought was that she had stepped back into the side room. Maybe I had misunderstood where the voice came from. Maybe she had called my name and then turned around quickly for some reason. But I looked toward the side room. She was not there. Jay was still in the original side room, and the door was partly open. I could see enough to know that Kay was not standing inside. It also did not sound like Jay. I know voices can sound different depending on where you are standing, but this did not sound like Jay calling me from the side room. It sounded exactly like Kay, directly behind me. I remember feeling a small rush of confusion before I felt scared. I was trying to make sense of the layout. Kay had been close to me. I had heard her say my name. I had answered her. Then, almost immediately, she was gone. The area was not large enough for her to have gone far that quickly. There was a bigger connecting room farther away. That room was roughly 25 feet from the side room and even farther from the supply room. From where I was standing near the supply room, it was probably about 33 feet away. To get there, Kay would have had to leave the small room, move through the main room, enter the larger connecting room, and go far enough inside that I could not see her. She would have had to do all of that almost instantly. It did not seem possible. I went looking for her. I stepped into the main room and looked around. For a second, I thought maybe she was standing behind something or had gone in another direction. But there was nobody there. The room was empty except for me. Then Kay came out of the large connecting room. She walked out from the direction of the bigger room as though she had been there for a little while. I looked at her and asked why she had called my name. She looked confused. She said she had not said anything. At first, I assumed she misunderstood the question. I told her that I had clearly heard her call my name. I told her it sounded like she had been standing right behind me. I told her I had answered her almost immediately, turned around, and she was gone. Kay said she had not called for me. She said that after she left the side room, she had gone into the bigger connecting room. That was where she had been. I asked her if she had maybe said something as she walked away, or called my name without thinking. She said no. She did not remember saying anything at all. She had not been trying to get my attention. She had not been standing behind me. She had gone straight from the side room toward the larger connecting room. That was when the whole thing became much stranger. The door to the big connecting room closes slowly. It does not swing shut quickly. It takes time. If someone opens it and walks through, it stays open for a moment and then gradually closes. The movement is noticeable. It does not snap shut behind someone. Kay pointed out something that had not occurred to me at first. If she had gone through that door after calling my name, I would have seen the door still closing when I turned around. But I did not. I had turned around almost right away. I had looked toward the main room and the connecting area. I had not seen the slow closing door moving. I had not seen Kay going through it. I had not heard it open or close. It was as if the voice had come from behind me, but there had been no one behind me at all. I did not know what to say after that. Kay seemed unsettled too, but we both tried to treat it like one of those strange things that happens at work and gets forgotten after everyone goes back to what they were doing. We had tasks to finish. There were things to put away. Jay was still in the side room. Nobody wanted to stop everything because someone thought they heard a voice. Still, I could not stop replaying it. The voice had been too clear. It had not been a sound from far away that my brain turned into my name. It had not sounded like a random noise, a radio, equipment, or a conversation from another room. It had been a person's voice. It had sounded close. It had sounded like Kay, and I had answered it without hesitation because there had been no reason to doubt it. Hold on a second. That was all I said. But afterward, I kept thinking about how strange it was that I had answered someone who was not there. The area where we work has always had a weird reputation among the people who spend time there. We joke that it is haunted, not always seriously, but enough that everyone knows what people mean when they say it. There have been many times when it sounds like someone is coming in. You will be working in one of the rooms and hear something that sounds like a door opening, or you will hear a faint movement near the entrance, the kind of sound that makes you expect someone to walk in at any second. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps. Sometimes it sounds like someone shifting something near the door. Sometimes it is just that feeling you get when the sound in a room changes and you know somebody should be there. Then you look. Nobody is there. At first, it is easy to explain. Maybe someone walked by outside. Maybe the building made a sound. Maybe air pressure moved a door slightly. Maybe you heard something from another room and assumed it was closer than it really was. Most workplaces have odd noises. Secure rooms especially can have ventilation systems, equipment, locks, sensors, and doors that make sounds at strange times. There are reasonable explanations for a lot of it. But over time, the same kind of thing happened often enough that we began joking about it. Someone would hear a noise near the entrance and say, "Someone's coming." Then they would look. Nothing. Another person would hear what sounded like a door or footsteps and turn around. Nothing. It got to the point where people would sometimes pause mid-conversation because they thought someone had entered the area. Then they would laugh a little nervously when they realized the rooms were still empty. The motion-detecting light near the entry has made it worse. There is a light attached to a motion detector near the entrance. Normally, it comes on when someone walks through the entry area. It is supposed to react to movement. When someone approaches, the light turns on. When nobody is there, it should stay off. But there have been times when the light came on by itself. Not once, not in a way that could easily be blamed on a passing shadow or a bug. More than once. You could be in one of the rooms and suddenly notice the entry light turn on. The first instinct is always the same. Someone must be coming in. Someone must have opened the door. Someone must be nearby. So you look, and there is nobody. Sometimes it is possible that the sensor picked up movement from somewhere you cannot see. Maybe someone passed in another hallway. Maybe the sensor has a wide range. Maybe air movement or some technical issue triggered it. But there was one time when the lights, sounds, and security logs all lined up in a way that made it harder to laugh off. A few of us were working in the secured area when we heard voices. Not clear enough to understand every word, but clear enough that we thought people were nearby. It sounded like more than one person. The entry light came on around the same time. The normal assumption was that someone had entered. Maybe another team had come through. Maybe security had sent someone in. Maybe someone with access had opened a door while we were focused on our work. We checked. Nobody was there. We looked through the rooms. We checked the connecting areas. We asked around. There was no one in the immediate space who should have caused the light to come on or the voices to be heard. Eventually, we asked security to check the entry logs. That is the part that made everyone uncomfortable. The logs showed no entry other than ours. Nobody had come into the secured area. No one had used access to get through the door. No one had opened the entry point. There was no record of an employee, visitor, security worker, or anyone else coming in. According to the logs, the only people there were the people who were already supposed to be there. Us. That did not prove anything supernatural, of course. Security systems can fail, sensors can trigger by mistake, sound can travel through walls in strange ways. Voices from another part of a building can seem close if the acoustics are odd enough. There may always be an explanation. But it was still unsettling. When you are in a secure place, you expect the security measures to make things easier to explain. You expect doors, logs, access records, cameras, and motion lights to tell you what happened. You expect to be able to say, someone came in at this time, or the sensor was triggered by this person, or that sound came from the hallway. But sometimes there is nothing. A light turns on. You hear voices. You look around. No one is there. You check the system. No entry. That leaves you with a strange feeling that is hard to shake. The voice I heard that day felt connected to all of that. It happened in the same area. It happened near the same rooms where people often think they hear someone coming in. It happened in a place where a motion light has turned on without anyone entering. It happened in a place where security logs have shown no one coming through, even when people clearly heard what sounded like voices. I still try to think of normal explanations. Maybe Kay's voice carried differently through the rooms than I realized. Maybe she said my name in another room, and it sounded much closer because of the walls or doors. But that does not feel right. It sounded directly behind me. It was at a normal speaking level. It was not echoing. It did not sound distant or distorted. Maybe Jay said my name, and my brain assumed it was Kay because Kay had just been beside me. But it did not sound like Jay. Jay was still in the side room. The door was partly open, and I could tell where Jay was. I had worked around both of them enough to know the difference in their voices. Maybe I imagined it. That is possible too. People mishear things all the time. When you are concentrating on work, carrying items, and moving quickly, your brain can mistake background sounds for speech. You can think someone called your name when they did not. It happens. But this did not feel like that. It was too specific. It was not just a sound that resembled my name. It was my name spoken clearly, in Kay's voice, right behind me. I answered naturally. I did not even stop to question it, because it sounded completely real. Then I turned around, and there was no one there. The unsettling part is not that I heard a strange sound at work. Strange sounds happen everywhere. The unsettling part is that the voice seemed to belong to a person who should have been standing within arm's reach of me. But she was already much farther away, and according to the way the doors work, she could not have moved from behind me to that connecting room in the time it took me to turn around without me seeing something. I have thought about the exact timing many times. Kay came out of the side room with me. I went toward the supply room. She went another direction. I heard her call my name. I answered. I turned around within 2 seconds. She was gone. Then I found her coming out from the larger connecting room, far enough away that she could not realistically have been the person who spoke behind me. It happened so quickly that I did not have time to create a story in my head. I did not hear a noise and spend several minutes wondering what it was. I heard a voice, responded, and turned around. That is why it has stayed with me. People still joke about the room being haunted. Sometimes someone will hear a sound and say, "That place is doing it again." Sometimes the entry light will come on, and everyone will look up at once. Sometimes a door or a motion sensor does something strange, and somebody will mention the security logs from the time we heard voices, but no one had entered. Most of the time, we laugh about it. It is easier to laugh than to admit that the place sometimes feels wrong. But there are moments when the joke stops being funny. For me, that moment was when I heard Kay say my name. I can still hear it clearly in my mind. It did not sound threatening. It did not sound angry. It sounded ordinary. That almost makes it worse. It sounded like a normal coworker trying to get my attention during a normal workday in a normal room. I said, "Hold on a second." Then I turned around. and nobody was there. When I was young, I want to say maybe 9 or 10 years old, I went to a birthday party at the restaurant of an old village pub. It was one of those places that had been there for centuries and looked like it had collected stories from every generation that had passed through it. The building dated back to 1624, which sounded impossibly old to me when I was a child. At that age, anything older than my grandparents felt ancient. A place from the 1600s might as well have been from another world. The pub had low ceilings, old wooden beams, uneven floors, and walls that seemed thicker than normal. I remember the restaurant area feeling warm and crowded inside, with yellow lights, adults talking over each other, the smell of food, and the sounds of plates and cutlery coming from nearby tables. It was a normal birthday party. There were children running around, parents trying to keep everyone calm, party food being brought out, and the usual excitement that came with being invited somewhere you did not normally get to go. The birthday boy was one of the kids in our group, and he was full of energy the way most children are at parties. We had all been sitting at the table for what felt like forever, waiting for dinner to be finished. The adults had told us that we could not go out to the play area until after we had eaten. That made the play area feel even more exciting, because we could see parts of it through the windows from inside. Behind the pub, there was a large beer garden. It had tables for adults, an open area, and a children's play space set farther back from the building. The garden was bigger than it first looked. Beyond the regular tables and grassy areas, there were tall trees around the edges that made the whole place feel enclosed. During the day, it probably looked cheerful enough. It was a place where families could sit outside, have drinks, let their kids play, and enjoy the summer evenings. But later in the day, as it started getting dark, the garden felt very different. The play area was surrounded by huge trees. They were old, tall, and thick enough that they blocked out much of the light once the sun started going down. The branches stretched over parts of the garden and made dark shapes against the sky. Even though we were still close to the pub, the area near the trees felt farther away from the adults. It was quieter there. The sounds from inside the restaurant became softer, and the warm lights of the building felt distant once we got near the edge of the garden. There was also a small wooden bridge. The bridge crossed over a narrow stream that ran through part of the garden. It was not a big river or anything dramatic. It was just a little stream, the kind that made a soft sound when the water moved over stones. But to a group of children, it made the play area feel like it had two separate worlds. On one side was the larger play space near the pub, where everyone could still see the restaurant lights. On the other side was a smaller area surrounded by trees. That smaller area had a zip line. The zip line was what everyone wanted to use. It was hidden farther back among the trees, past the bridge, and it seemed more exciting because it was just far enough away to feel slightly forbidden. It was not truly dangerous, of course. It was still part of the pub garden. Adults could walk over there easily. But as children, we saw it as a separate little place, like a secret section of the garden that belonged to us. By the time we were finally allowed outside, dinner had ended and the sky was beginning to darken. It was not completely night yet. There was still some light left in the sky, the kind of fading blue-gray light that comes after sunset. The sun had gone down behind the trees, but the sky above the branches still held a little color. The pub lights were coming on outside. The windows behind us glowed warmly. The garden lamps made small circles of light on the ground. But the trees around the play area were already dark. We all ran outside as soon as we were allowed. Children do not slowly walk toward a play area after sitting through dinner. We ran, shouted, pushed past each other, and spread out immediately. Some kids went toward the swings, some climbed on the play equipment, others started chasing each other around the grass. I remember feeling happy at first. It had been a long day, and finally being allowed outside made everything feel exciting. The birthday boy decided we should play follow the leader. It was the kind of game children can play anywhere, because it does not need toys or rules that are too complicated. One person walks or runs somewhere, and everyone else has to copy them. If they jump, you jump. If they spin around, you spin around. If they climb over something, you climb over it too. The birthday boy was leading. He had all of us following behind him in a messy line. Some kids were paying attention. Some were laughing and doing their own thing. Some were trying to move ahead, because nobody likes being stuck at the back of a group when you are a child. I remember that we were all excited and loud, moving around the play area while the adults stayed nearer to the pub. At some point, the birthday boy headed toward the bridge. That made sense because the zip line was across the stream. He probably wanted to lead everyone to the smaller play area. We all followed him, running or walking in a loose group. The bridge was narrow enough that we had to slow down as we got closer. The stream made a faint sound below us, and the trees on the far side looked darker than the ones near the pub. The bridge was made of wood, and I remember the boards feeling slightly uneven under our feet. It was not a dangerous bridge. It was just old-looking, with railings on the sides and enough room for a few children to cross at once. The far side opened into the smaller play area, but it was mostly hidden by trees and shadows. The birthday boy stepped onto the bridge first. The rest of us followed. Then, suddenly, we all stopped. I do not remember anyone telling us to stop. Nobody shouted. Nobody said, "Wait." It was more like the entire group saw the same thing at exactly the same time and froze. There was a man standing on the far side of the bridge. At least, that was what it looked like. He was standing just beyond the bridge, where the trees began to close in around the smaller play area. He was not close enough for me to see a face. He was far enough away that the fading light and the shadows made details hard to make out, but he had the shape of a man. The strange thing was that he did not look solid. He looked like a shadow, not like a person wearing dark clothes, not like somebody standing in a black coat under the trees. He looked more like a full life-sized silhouette that had been cut out of black paper and placed upright in front of us. That is still the closest description I can give. It was as though someone had taken a person-shaped piece of dark paper, made it slightly transparent, and hung it among the trees. I could see the shape of the upper body, the head, the shoulders, and the outline of the arms, but I could also see the faint silhouette of the treetops and the fading sky through his torso. The trees behind him showed through. That was what made it feel so wrong. He was not fully black. He was not fully see-through either. He was somewhere in between. Dark enough that you could clearly see the outline of a human figure, but transparent enough that the background seemed to pass through him. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I remember that part clearly. The hat was not like a baseball cap or anything normal looking for someone standing in a pub garden. It had a broad, flat shape, the kind of hat you might imagine on an old-fashioned man. The brim made his head look wider, and it gave the figure an even more unsettling outline against the sky. For a second, nobody moved. I remember the feeling of standing there with the other children, all of us looking at the same thing. The game had completely stopped. The zip line did not matter anymore. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was pushing forward to cross the bridge. The figure did not say anything. He did not wave. He did not move closer. He just stood there. I do not remember seeing a face. I do not remember eyes. I do not remember clothing details beyond the hat and the dark outline of his body. But I remember knowing, with the absolute certainty that children sometimes have, that there was someone standing in front of us and that we should not go any closer. Then someone screamed. I do not know who screamed first. It could have been one of the younger kids. It could have been the birthday boy. It could have been one of the girls near the front of the line. But the scream broke whatever silence had fallen over us. After that, everyone started running. We turned around and ran back toward the pub as fast as we could. The bridge suddenly felt too narrow. Everyone was trying to get away at once. Children were shouting and crying. Some were stumbling over each other. I remember feeling terrified of being at the back of the crowd. I did not want to be the last person on the bridge. I did not want to be the closest one to that figure. I did not want to turn around and see it moving toward us. I just wanted to get back to the lights. I wanted to get back to the adults. I wanted to get inside the pub where there were people, noise, and warmth. I am not proud of it, but I think I shoved another child out of the way while we were running. I was panicking. I was small, scared, and desperate not to be left behind. It was one of those moments where fear takes over and you are not thinking about being kind or polite. You are only thinking about getting away. We ran across the bridge, through the larger play area, and toward the pub. The adults probably looked up in confusion when they saw us coming back. We had only been outside for a short time. We had been excited to go to the zip line, and now we were running toward them like something had chased us. Everyone was talking at once. There's a man. Someone's over there. He's by the bridge. He's wearing a hat. We saw him. I remember trying to explain what I had seen, but I was crying or close to crying. It is hard to explain something frightening when you are a child because you do not have the words for it. I did not know how to say, he looked like a transparent black silhouette. I probably just said he was a shadow man, or a dark man, or someone dressed in black. The adults tried to calm us down. At first, they probably assumed we had seen another customer. That was the most logical explanation. It was a pub garden. Someone could have been standing near the trees. Maybe a person had gone out for a cigarette. Maybe someone had been walking through the garden. Maybe an adult had been checking on something near the play equipment. But we kept insisting that it was strange. We kept insisting that he was at the far side of the bridge. A few adults eventually went outside to look. I remember watching from inside or near the doorway as they went into the garden. They walked toward the bridge, speaking calmly, probably expecting to find nothing at all. They may have had a torch or used the garden lights. The adults did not look scared. They were mostly trying to show us there was nothing to worry about. They checked the far side of the bridge. They looked near the trees. They looked around the smaller play area where the zip line was. Then they came back and said there was nobody there. Nothing at all. No man, no customer, no person smoking, no one hiding near the trees, no sign that anyone had been standing where we said the figure had been. That did not make us feel better. In some ways, it made it worse. If it had been another customer, we could have accepted that. Maybe we would have felt embarrassed for screaming. Maybe the adults would have laughed and told us not to scare ourselves. But there was nobody there. The place beyond the bridge was empty. We did not go back outside after that. At least, I know I did not. The adults may have encouraged us to return to the play area, but nobody wanted to go near the bridge again. The zip line was forgotten. The small tree-lined area that had seemed exciting only minutes earlier now felt like the worst place in the world. I remember sitting closer to the adults after that. I remember looking through the windows toward the dark garden and wondering whether the figure was still out there. Every time the trees moved in the wind, I thought I saw the shape of the hat again. Every shadow near the bridge looked like someone standing still. Eventually, the party ended. Parents collected their children. Coats were found. Goodbyes were said. Everyone got into cars and went home. The next day, life continued normally. We went back to school. We talked about the party. Some people may have said it was probably nothing. Others may have said they saw the same thing. I do not remember every conversation after that. But I remember the bridge. I remember the trees. I remember the fading light behind the figure. And I remember that wide-brimmed hat. For years I did not think about it much. It became one of those childhood memories that sits somewhere in the back of your mind. You remember it when someone mentions ghost stories, old pubs, or strange things seen in the dark. You tell it occasionally, and people might say you were a child and children can scare each other easily. They might say it was a person smoking, a shadow, or a tree branch that happened to look human. And honestly, I understand that. There are a lot of normal explanations. It could have been another customer. It could have been someone having a cigarette away from the main beer garden. It could have been a person in dark clothing standing in a strange spot. It could have been a tree, a post, a shadow, or some object that our child brains turned into a figure because we were playing outside at dusk and were already in that excited, nervous mood children get when daylight begins to disappear. Maybe the fading light made the figure look transparent. Maybe the treetops seemed to show through because it was actually an object in front of the sky. Maybe the hat was not a hat at all. Maybe, over the years, my memory filled in details because that is what memories do. Every time you remember something, you can change it slightly without realizing it. A shadow can become darker. A shape can become more human. A detail can become clearer than it really was. I know all of that logically. The problem is that I work at that pub now. That is what brought the memory back. I had not thought about it properly in years. The pub had always been a place from childhood, somewhere I went for a birthday party and saw something strange. Then, much later, I ended up working there. The first time I walked through the garden as an employee, I recognized everything. The building still had the same old feeling. The beams were still low. The rooms still had that old pub smell of wood, food, old carpet, and beer. The layout had changed in small ways over the years, but the place still felt familiar. Then I saw the beer garden. The bridge was still there, the trees were still there, the stream was still there, and the zip line was still there on the far side. Seeing it as an adult was strange. The garden looked smaller than I remembered. The bridge was not as long or as dramatic as it had seemed when I was a child. The distance between the pub and the play area was shorter than I remembered too. But the atmosphere at night was exactly the same. The lights from the pub fade quickly once you move toward the back of the garden. The trees become dark shapes. The stream is hard to see. The area beyond the bridge feels separated from everything else. Now, one of my jobs involves taking the bins out at night. To do that, I have to walk past the garden. I have to pass close enough to the bridge that I cannot avoid seeing it. Most nights, I am completely fine. I know it is just a bridge. I know it is just a play area with a zip line. I know that the trees are trees, the darkness is darkness, and the shadows are only shadows. But I still try not to look in that direction after dark. I know that sounds ridiculous. I am an adult now. I work there. I have seen the garden in daylight. I know the paths. I know where the lights are. I know that if someone was standing near the bridge, they would probably be a customer, a coworker, or someone from the neighborhood. Still, when I take the bins out at night, I keep my eyes forward. I listen to the sound of the wheelie bins rolling over the ground. I focus on the job. I do not look past the bridge toward the smaller play area, because there is always that small part of me that remembers being 9 or 10 years old, standing with a group of children in the fading light, looking across a wooden bridge at a man-shaped shadow wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I remember how every one of us stopped at once. I remember how nobody needed to explain why we were scared. I remember the sudden screaming and running. And I remember the adults going outside, only to come back and say there was nothing there. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was never anyone there. Maybe it was just a person smoking, a strangely shaped tree, a shadow, or a memory that has grown stranger with age. But when I walk past that bridge at night, I still do not look too closely. Just in case. The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.